In the cold, frozen air of Washington, where political games were played with ruthless cruelty and ambitions were sharper than a razor's edge, George Boyden, a gray-haired old man with sad eyes, was preparing for the battle for the presidency. He was confident in his victory. Everything suggested that he was on top. Experience, charisma, public support, all were on his side. But fate had a much darker script in store for him. At the very moment Boyden was delivering his policy speech proclaiming peace and prosperity for America, something clicked in his head. A small, almost imperceptible pain like a pinprick flashed through his temple but quickly passed. Boyden dismissed it, attributing it to fatigue. He had no way of knowing that at the moment a foreign entity, a parasite with malicious intentions, had entered his brain, one that even the most seasoned political analysts couldn't have predicted. At first, the parasite acted quietly, corroding Boyden from within, like rust slowly eating away at metal. It started with minor disorientation, forgotten words, strange, foggy gazes that many dismissed as signs of age. However, Boyden felt that something was wrong. He sensed a cold, sinister whisper in his head, something alien trying to take over his thoughts. Soon, the parasite became more active. During a debate with Dak Camp, when Boyden was supposed to impress the audience with his charisma and persuasiveness, his speech became incoherent, his thoughts tangled in a knot, and his eyes froze with a cold, empty stare. Camp, like a predator, sensed weakness and pounced on his opponent with relish, attacking him with absurd accusations and insults. The audience was shocked, the media horrified, and Boyden, struggling with an invisible enemy inside him, felt his chances of victory slipping away before his eyes. With each passing day, the parasite dug deeper into Boyden's brain, distorting his perception of reality, pushing him toward rash actions and foolish statements. He saw his own thoughts turning to fog, and his words coming out of his mouth as if they were from someone else's mind. In his head, he heard a mocking laugh that only he could hear, a reminder that he was no longer in control. Boyden desperately tried to fight, but the parasite was too strong. He sought solace in his family, hoping that the love and support of his wife and children would help him deal with the plague. But even they couldn't understand what was happening to him. Boyden was like a shipwreck in a stormy sea, without a compass and without a helm. As the election's days dwindled down, the parasite, sensing its power over Boyden had peaked, decided to play its sinister game. During the final speech, when Boyden was supposed to deliver words of hope and prosperity, the parasite placed words in his mouth that were filled with hatred and fear. Boyden, unable to resist, uttered words he would never have wanted to say. He accused his opponents of betrayal, vilified his own people, and promised that the most unthinkable things to seize power. The audience was in shock. Everyone realized that the man before them was no longer the person they once knew. Boyden lost the election in a landslide. Camp, seizing his second victory, felt the full force of his power, and Boyden, held hostage by the parasite, left the political stage, no longer the man who once dreamed of the presidency. But who planted this parasite? Where could it have come from? Unfortunately, Boyden had no answers. After the election, the parasite, having achieved its goals, calmed down. It no longer needed Boyden, but did not release him. Boyden remained trapped in his nightmares, haunted by an invisible enemy living inside his head. He couldn't breathe, think, or speak freely. His life had turned into an endless nightmare with no way out. And so it continues to this day. The parasite, confident in its victory, rests deep within Boyden's brain. It is immersed in dark, sinister thoughts, watching with delight as its victim goes insane. In the frozen air of Washington, where political games were played with cold cruelty and ambitions were sharper than a razor's edge. The story of George Boyden, a president who was denied victory by a parasite residing in his head, is forgotten. But the parasite has not disappeared. It lives in the dark corners of history, a reminder that even the greatest person can fall victim to unseen forces lurking in the shadows. A few years passed. Camp, in his typical hubris, declared himself a great president, but his reign was little more than noise in the void. Deep down, he felt a vague uneasiness, an inexplicable anxiety. It was as if shadow from the past haunted him, reminding him of that elusive force that intervened in his room, of that invisible hand that helped him seize power. Meanwhile, Boyden, sinking deeper in his madness, occasionally appeared in public like a ghost from the past. He spoke to small groups of people, his eyes empty, his words jumbled. His speeches resembled the whisper of wine sweeping over a graveyard where forgotten, withered lives lay buried. One day, Boyden arrived in a small town in Northern America, where he was supposed to give a speech to the locals. He stood at the podium, trying to focus on his speech, but the parasite in his head would not leave him alone. It whispered ominous words in his ear, reminding him of past failures, of the missteps that made Boyden tremble with despair. Suddenly, in the middle of his speech, Boyden stopped talking. He froze, his eyes empty. A new fear took root deep in his soul. He sensed that the parasite within him was awakening, ready for another attack. At that moment, a strange commotion erupted in the hall. People grew restless. Attention aroused that defied explanation. In this inexplicable state of anxiety, people did not notice a shadowy figure emerging from the back of the hall, moving towards Boyden. It was neither seen nor heard, moving silently like a ghost in the night fog. Boyden felt someone watching him, but he couldn't turn around. He couldn't see who was behind him. He felt no fear, but rather a strange pull, as if he were being invited into a world of mystery and the unknown. He couldn't resist. He was like a puppet in the hands of an invisible puppeteer. The shadow came closer, closer still. Boyden felt a slight prick in his temple, like a pinprick. He closed his eyes, not from pain but from some indescribable fear. In his head, a whisper sounded, muffled and low, like a distant rumble of a thunder. When Boyden opened his eyes, his son Harter stood before him. His face was pale, his eyes empty, as if death itself were staring out of them. He reached out to him, his fingers cold and thin like bones. "Dad," Harter whispered, his voice sounding as if the wind were whispering that the end of the world was near. "I'm here." Boyden recoiled, but his legs remained motionless, as if paralyzed. He looked at his son and saw in his eyes the reflection of his own hopelessness. In his eyes, he saw the same emptiness that lived within himself. "You're not alone," Harter said softly. "I will help you." At that moment, a strange noise arose in the hall. People started talking, bustling around, as if something had spooked them. Boyden looked around and saw that Harter had vanished, as if he had never been there. The hall quickly emptied. He was alone, surrounded by an empty hall where the shadow of the unknown had recently lingered. He tried to say something, but his vocal cords failed him. He tried to get off the podium, but his legs wouldn't obey. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he felt that his life had become an endless game, one in which he could no longer control his fate. He was just a pawn in a larger game that he could not understand.